Okay, so I just wanted to say a couple quick words about GoWP, if anyone's not familiar. So at GoWP, we are a team that is devoted to helping agencies grow by providing exceptional outsourced WordPress services. The agencies that partner with GoWP are able to focus on growth because they can depend on the GoWP team to support that growth and scale with them. So whether you're growing your team with one of our dedicated developers or outsourcing tedious services like website maintenance and content edits, the GoWP team is here to support your agency. I also want to mention that creating a GoWP partner account is 100% free, and it gets you access to all sorts of resources to grow your agency. So once you create that account, you have access to our knowledge base in the GoWP portal, where we have landing page templates to help you sell care plans, maintenance schedule lead magnet, landing page to help you generate leads with that lead magnet, and all sorts of things to kind of help support you in increasing your recurring revenue. We've also got all sorts of documentation that if you are using our services, you can take that documentation, put your own branding on it, and share it with the clients that you have on those plans. You can create your partner account at my.gowp.com, and I will put some links in right after I'm done talking here, so you guys can check that out. Also want to quickly mention the Facebook group. So for those of you who are watching and may not be a member yet, it is the GoWP Niche Agency Owners Facebook group. And this is a community of agency professionals who either already have a niche or would like to niche down. Web professionals, really the main goal here is agency professionals, web professionals, all there to help each other out. It's a great community. If you're not a member yet, I hope you will check it out and join us in there. And you can grab the recording of this webinar there as well. And any links that we talk about in the chat here will be posted over there, so you can access those after we're done here today also. So just a few quick notes about the webinar is I'll be watching the chat here in the Zoom room and also on the Facebook live stream. So if you have any questions, put them up and I'll get them to Tom either during the presentation as they come in if it's something important, or we might save them to the end for Q&A. So it looks like the chat in the Zoom room's working. If you're watching on Facebook, it'd be great if you could just say hi, let us know you're watching, and that way we know everything's working correctly. So other than that, let's get to why we're here today, and that's Tom. Hey, Tom.
Hey, Emily, thank you so much. I'm so happy to be with you all. And we had this is actually coming on the heels of the happy hour that we had on Friday, which was great because we spent kind of the better part of 50 minutes talking about site optimization, performance, answering questions, and I see some familiar names already in the chat that were at the happy hour. And so I incorporated some of that into the deck that I'm about to show you. So let me share my screen here and we can get started.
Awesome. Yeah, that happiness hour was so great. We hadn't intended on spending the whole hour talking about speed, site performance and speed optimization, all that, but there were so many great questions and you really went deep on so many great things during that call, Tom.
Yeah,
so thanks for that.
It was a lot of fun. I had a blast. And so given that, I'm going to try to get through this as quick as I can. And Emily's going to answer, if you have questions, ask them in chat. Emily's going to interrupt me if it's relevant to what I'm covering. But at the end, if you have a site that has really been particularly difficult for you to figure out why it's slow or what's going on, I'm going to probably have some time at the end to do maybe some live analysis, and we'll screen share and I'll give you my 2 cents for what it's worth, probably not much more than that, on what might be going on with your website. Part of the sort of challenge of this presentation was figuring out where to go with this. Should we make it something that was really geared towards beginners or geared towards more advanced folks? And so I tried to sort of strike a balance between this so that we get into some meaty stuff, but we also cover and start from a point where you won't be left behind if maybe you're not as familiar with GTmetrix or page optimization and all that kind of stuff. So with that, I will get started here. And my name is Tom Fanelli. And so I am the CEO of Convesio. If you haven't checked us out, check us out. We're a containerized, scalable WordPress hosting platform that's very innovative. It's very different than a lot of the hosts that are on the market. Interesting facts about me though. I built my first website in 1995 using a product called Adobe PageMill, which rarely anyone knows even what is when I talk to them anymore. And so it was one of Adobe's precursors to, them building web creation applications way before they acquired Macromedia. So I go way back in the web business. And so originally, I'm from New Jersey, but I moved to Florida when I was very young. I spent most of my formative years in Florida. 12 years ago, I moved to California to join a startup. We sold that startup. We took the company that bought us public. I subsequently went to work for many other companies in the Bay Area. And I recently, as in the last 6 months, just moved back to Florida. And so I've got 4 kids. I put their ages there for you, 16 to 4. So, I get the thick of parenting every day, a 4-year-old, which is exciting. And I've been married 19 years. So that's a little bit about me and Convesio. So to jump in, I wanted to start off first by defining what these tools are that we're going to be talking about, okay? And if you have at all dipped your toe into trying to make sense of page speed optimization, page speed scores, you have likely used one of these 2 tools. Maybe you've used Pingdom, but that doesn't really give you scores. It's just timings for testing your site. So on the left is GTmetrix, a very popular tool that many agency and web development folks have used for a very long time. And then on the right, there is Google PageSpeed Insights. So a little bit about these tools real quick. So up until October, I think it was, GTmetrix really had a proprietary grading system for your websites. And so it was almost 100% of the time different than what Google was putting forth as your page speed score. And that was sort of a sticky point for some folks because people would grade in GTmetrix and then other people would grade in PageSpeed and there'd be a different score and people would be like, well, wait, why is this different? What can I do to make it better? Particularly SEO folks would, think of the Google PageSpeed as the canon or the authoritative score. And they were right to do that. And so as of October, GTmetrix launched, I think, their biggest update in history and started to adopt the same grading mechanism that PageSpeed Insights adopted from Google. And so that's 2 of the tools. But there's a third tool. This is one that I think is less well known. And that is that in Google Chrome, they have what's called Lighthouse. And you'll see the tab there for Lighthouse. Lighthouse is actually the code that is powering PageSpeed Insights and GTmetrix. It's the underlying algorithms that Google uses to do its performance auditing and all of that. And so the big update in October for GTmetrix was it started to use the Google Lighthouse algorithms, which PageSpeed Insights also uses. So, really quickly, GTmetrix, I have a trick question coming up, so pay attention to these screenshots. GTmetrix, Google PageSpeed Insights, and Lighthouse. Okay, but wait a second. Did anyone notice, and put in the chat, did anyone notice anything strange about those analysis I just put up? So I'm going to open the chat window here just to see if anyone can. Oh, actually, I don't think I can. Can I? Oh, I can. Yeah. I'm going to open up the chat. Yes. Okay. You all, I know this. This is probably, okay, several people, Charlie, Stephen, Shauna, all of you noticed these were different numbers, okay? If you have ever felt the stress of running these tests and the fact that they do not have, they have totally different scores, then you are not alone, okay? So a couple things I want to sort of level set with you on this here is that, sorry, let me get my next slide. So all of these tools use different parameters when they measure your site. So GTmetrix, they all use Google Lighthouse, but it's an unthrottled default desktop connection, okay? PageSpeed Insights, and by the way, that usually gives some of the best tests of the two, Lighthouse, PageSpeed Insights and GTmetrix. They give you the most favorable results on GTmetrix because the connection is unthrottled and it's defaulting to desktop. PageSpeed Insights uses a throttled G3 connection and emulates an older mobile device. And that's why there almost always is much lower scores on PageSpeed Insights. Now, the difference here is you can't really control PageSpeed Insights, okay? You can set the settings in GTmetrix under the advanced settings. I think you might have to sign up for maybe a free account or a user. You can choose some parameters like connection type and device type, so you can emulate something closer to PageSpeed Insights. But here's the really important thing. Neither of those really matter, okay? Because, and as many of you know, May is going to be the ranking algorithm update in SEO. If we have any SEO folks that want to contribute more info and chat to that, we have basically, May is when Google's going to start to look at and include these page speed metrics into your ranking factors. Now, part of this challenge is Google doesn't use either of these two reportings to actually determine what your page speed is. They use Core Vitals, which is in your search console, and this uses real world browser information from people actually visiting your website. And so why is this important is because if you go into your Google Search Console and you look at your Core Web Vitals, this is going to tell you how Google actually sees your site performance. This uses Lighthouse. And if you use Lighthouse on your computer, all right, and you use it in Chrome, and you have a similar connection to what your customers or your visitors are using, you should get a similar result in Core Vitals to what is actually happening. Now, some caveats on this, okay? So if you're a B2B audience and you deal mostly with people in modernized countries with broadband internet on desktop, that's what you should be looking at your Core Vitals on. If you're serving people in distant rural areas with slow internet on mobile devices, then that is something you need to factor in on how you optimize your website, which is, to say the same site will not work in the same manner for different audiences and different connection types. So you can have a website that's all green in the B2B space, but if you're serving rural farmers that are out in the field on their mobile devices, your website is not going to have, you're going to flag a bunch of things on Core Vitals because it's using real world data. Hopefully that makes sense to everyone. Emily, any questions? I'll just do a check-in here.
No questions yet, Tom, but we do have a few comments on people resonating on the fact that they're all giving different results all the time.
Okay, great. So that's why, and hopefully that makes more sense of it. And so the other factors when you're looking at GTmetrix, and again, you can't control this on Google PageSpeed Insights, is your location, all right? And on the happy hour, we actually had a lot of people mention HTTP2. Now, if your site is not using an SSL, which should be probably no one on this call because we should all be using SSLs, you want to make sure your host has HTTP2 enabled because it is much faster than HTTP1. It's the new protocol, right, where it is actually going to group requests together. When your website is requested, it groups all the requests together instead of making an individual request for everything. It's light years faster, and it's usually supported on most modern hosting providers. And I'll show you how to see that a little bit later here. The other thing is when you're testing your site, if you have a highly localized audience, for instance, you're in Southwest Florida where I am, and you're maybe a chiropractor, you might want to choose a hosting location, a server location that is close to where your audience is, or use a CDN like Cloudflare. One of the things that I see people inadvertently do is they test from a location that is not close to where their server is. So if you're using New York as a testing location and your server is in LA, then that could have an impact on speed and performance if you do not have an actual CDN in front of your site. And so keep that in mind. And remember, this testing location should be close to where your server is. Now, if you have a CDN like Cloudflare, and we'll talk a little bit about how you can maybe optimize that in a bit, but if you have a CDN like Cloudflare, then you should be able to test from any location and you'll get relatively optimized results. But there's some things you can do to dial that in a little bit more. All right, so let's start to take a look through this, and I'm going to start to break down what I think are the major areas of the GTmetrix software so you can learn how to interpret these things, all right? And so to the left, we have the GTmetrix grade, and it gives you grades on performance and structure. And then we have some of the core web vitals on the right, like largest contentful paint and total blocking time and content layout shift. And so we'll talk a little bit about those in a moment and what you should have as sort of benchmarks in order for you to shoot for in those things. And I'll tell you in a moment what Google has said about how it's going to factor your ranking request in. Below that, you've got the summary and you've got several tabs here. Personally, I spend most of my time in the performance tab and the waterfall tab. And I'll talk to you about what those are and how I use them in just a moment. But this is the performance tab. So I want to sort of get you familiar with how to interpret this. So when you're looking at your own website's scores here in GTmetrix, you can kind of make sense of what it is that you need to focus on. So on the top, we see all of the core vital metrics Google is going to use to determine whether or not you get this ranking factor. And as of my last reading on this, what Google themselves have said is you have to hit the minimum score in each one of these areas, okay, before you will get the ranking indicator that your site is page speed optimized or whatever, that's my words. But before you get the boost or the factor, it's a toggle. It's either you get it or you don't. And you have to meet the minimum requirements of having all of these elements that you're seeing on the screen color-coded here in green need to be green. My interpretation of that is it's got to be okay or good, okay? If it doesn't meet that requirement, then you will not be considered as having the ranking boost for PageSpeed Insights. And if there's any SEO folks that might have more information on that, because this is hot off the presses in the last few weeks, then feel free to contribute that into chat. So a lot of this stuff on the top has to do with how your site is coded and how quickly it loads and how efficient that it is. And so some of the stuff that is below the fold has to do with your actual server and hosting performance and caching and all of that. And so let's diagnose this. One of the first things I look at is time to first byte, which is down here on the left, okay? So Google says this needs to be 200 milliseconds. And the time to first byte is essentially when your request is made to your website, how quickly does your website serve begin to make the first response to that? And some of the issues you'll see with your site is if you have a very high time to first byte, you might not have caching implemented correctly on your site, or the request that the request that you're testing might not effectively be cached. The other thing that I look at, there's two other really important metrics here: on load time and fully loaded time. And I want to talk a little bit about the difference between these. This on load time in the bottom left here is when a user might perceive your site as being fully loaded. There are a lot of times that I see on load times that happen around 2 seconds and fully loaded times taking 5 to 7 seconds. What could cause that? External scripts. If you have a chat bot that waits a few seconds to load on your website, your site won't be fully loaded until that chat bot appears. And so you might see, when you look at waterfalls, you might see everything loaded really quick and there's a big delay and then something else loads. And so there is business reasons why you might have a longer fully loaded time. You want to try and make it as fast as possible, but things like delaying certain scripts to load, or things that need to occur or happen after a visitor hits the page that need to wait, like sometimes pop-ups can cause these. All of those things will factor into your fully loaded time, and they might not be things you're willing to sacrifice to get your fully loaded time less than 5 seconds. It doesn't necessarily mean that you've got a bad user experience if your onload is really fast. And so sometimes we'll see, when we move customers from one host to another, you'll see that the onload time gets drastically faster because that's very relevant to what's happening on the server. But the fully loaded time is still delayed because it has to do with what's happening off of the site. Maybe it's calling a bunch of third-party scripts and things like that. All right, so these are some metrics. Take a screenshot of this if you want. These are the recommended metrics that I sort of have seen, or that are things that, in my mind, are where you should sort of target, or what GTmetrix says. And by the way, there's a really great feature in GTmetrix as you're looking at the performance metrics. It's a button in the top right that toggles on the descriptions. Much of this data is in there as well. Okay. There's also a really awesome tool that is sort of hidden, and you got to Google it. And I put the URL at the bottom. This is the Lighthouse scoring calculator. And what I think is really interesting is it's worth anyone who's serious about wanting to understand this to go play with this. This tells you all of the actual weightings in the score, so you can see which things are weighted the most. And what's really great about this is, a lot of times this stuff is sort of apparent in GTmetrix. They make it easy to tell you, like, this thing's really impacting your score. But if you wanted to put your data in here and you wanted to play with this and see, well, what happens if I do this? And what happens if I do that? So you can sort of emulate if you fixed certain things, because let's face it, everyone knows, we've all tried to optimize sites. Some sites are like beyond a reasonable amount of effort where you can repair it. And it's like, you actually got to go in and start recoding things or swapping out components and things like that. So this is a great tool to have. Okay, this is probably the most scary screen. There's a couple of, maybe one other one looking at header information, but when we look at Lighthouse or GTmetrix and we really want to understand what's happening, you need to be able to read this waterfall chart, and you need to be able to understand what's happening in it, because as you start to have much more complicated sites, this site I'm using, my blog, is very, very, very simple. And in fact, one thing that's an important thing to keep in mind here is that down here at the bottom, you'll see this 17 requests. It is not uncommon for these things. I've seen sites have 800-900 requests, okay? And this is usually publishers who are jamming in lots of advertising pixels and data. One thing is for sure that I see between fast and slow sites, and that is the number of requests. There's no way to get around it, but the number of requests that happen inside of your page loading is always going to make your site slower. Aside from whether it took a long time to load the asset or not, like it's a big image or it's a slow call to a third party or something like that, if you've got 100 requests, and by the way, the normal amount is anywhere between, I think if you're doing like 70 to 80 requests, you're fairly efficient. Well, this is an outlier at 17 is very, very efficient. At 70 to 80 requests, you're pretty efficient. I mean, it's very common to see 100, 120, 150 requests. Once you start getting up to 200 requests, 180, I feel like that's overkill. Like, you got to start to like pare that back, figure out more creative ways to do what you're doing without making so many requests. So, that's a general guideline. I'm looking more intently when you have that. And so the way I read this is you'll notice these very, very helpful color-coded bars, okay, that are going down the slide here. These correlate, let me jump back once. Okay. These correlate to these color codes that you're seeing here, okay? And so when you look at this, you can start to tell what is happening in each one of these things and what's taking the most time to load, okay? And so this is like a really good way for you to start to diagnose sections of assets that are starting to load and how long they're taking. Clearly, like I've got something happening here that's blocking this font, is what this beige thing happens here. So this font is taking a lot of time to load, more time than I'd like, that's being blocked for other assets to load. It's sort of essentially waiting for these other assets to load, and then it's loading. And so if I could figure this out, I could shave off, you know, a couple hundred milliseconds off of my load time. That's obviously something that's, you want to look for things that are taking seconds of time to load, okay? Okay, the other thing that I see that's really, really common, and it's a big mistake people make, is they look at every single request that they make on GTmetrix as the same. I got news for you. Not every request is the same. I mean, when you click that test or analyze button in GTmetrix, your site might not be getting a cached version. That test might actually be hitting something that's not cached, okay? And so what you need to start to learn to look at in the waterfall is if you click this little plus box over here, all right, it will open up the header information on this. And so what that's going to do is start to tell you a lot of really good information about your site. And by the way, this is my site's header information. Your site's header is going to be different based on your hosting provider, whether or not you use something like a CDN, whether or not you use you know, different caching plugins. You'll start to see lots of information here, but from a very basic level, you'll want to look for things that talk about cache, and you'll want to look for things as to whether it says hit or miss, okay? And so I'm going to show you a couple things like this, but I'm calling them out here. First, this is how you can see whether your site's using HTTP2 or not. All right. If it's not, it'll likely say HTTP 1.1 or something like that here. I'm using Cloudflare, so it's very common for me to see CF parameters in my header here. All right. So you can see this says cache, Cloudflare cache status hit. This tells me this request for this site was actually hit and served by Cloudflare. So I have full page caching on this. So it's serving the full HTML content from Cloudflare. I can see the server says Cloudflare. You might see your hosting provider here. You might see Nginx. You might see Apache. You might see your underlying status here, okay? And here's another reference, what's called Xcache status, all right? And so this is another thing that it will tell us whether or not we're serving a cached version or not. And so I don't want to overcomplicate this. If you don't see anything about caching in here, you don't have caching installed most likely. If you see stuff in here that says it is caching, you will see things in here like W3 Total Cache will make these things. WP Rocket will make entries in here. You will see something if you're using these popular caching plugins, you'll see this information in your header here, or you should. And that's a very, very good way. If you get a test that's really slow and it's like, why did I serve up an F all of a sudden? I thought my page speed's a B. Make sure your request that you did the test on is caching. Not every request caches from a server, okay? Okay, Emily, pausing 1 second. Any questions before I jump into this next section?
Yeah, we have had a couple questions. Some of them you've already answered just by nature of going through the presentation.
Okay, cool.
But one that came up earlier, will these slides be available? Are you able to make these available for attendees?
For sure, absolutely.
Awesome. Okay, we'll send that link out in the follow-up. So if you,
yep.
Thank you, Tom. So yeah, if you've registered, you'll get those in the follow-up email I send out. And this is a great question from Ben in the chat. And this kind of goes up to everyone who's watching, because I'm sure a lot of the folks in attendance here have dealt with this. So he says he'd love to hear any thoughts on how you get across to a client that the page speed cannot be increased due to old bloated code, and that they will have to invest in a rebuild to take advantage of the new block editor page speeds. So it's a really good question. It's really a whole topic of conversation here. But Tom, yeah, I don't know if you have any insights there, any good advice. All right.
My second to last slide, my last effective slide, is going to talk about, we just made this decision at my company to recode our entire site. So I'm going to take you through that. I'll address that question when I get to it. That's a great question. And it was an afterthought for me to think of putting this in because we just dealt with all this. So I'll give you a bunch of tips that I've seen and how to sell it to customers and all that kind of stuff.
Awesome. I love that. And we did get just another question here from Charlie. Is a miss because it got that in another request?
No, it is not. A miss is because it was not cached. There was no cached version of that page to serve, or it needed to fetch a new version. Caches, and not to get too into caches, but caches, especially caching on Cloudflare or WP Rocket, like a common scenario would be, let's say you're testing, by the way, I also think you guys should be testing not just your homepage. Remember, ranking factors, I don't know if the ranking factors on a site, I would assume it's on a page by page basis for Google, but test other pages in your site. But let's say you're testing a page and you just did an update and you hit test. That page hasn't cached yet in WP Rocket potentially. You might be hitting it on but especially if you're using dev sites. That's the other thing. And you've got caching, like you're constantly doing things, and WP Rocket's constantly purging requests. You have to hit a page 1 or 2 times to get that thing to start caching. And so I recommend you warm things up, right? So hit the test a couple times and see if you get the same the same results, and look in the header, expand the page, the first page in the waterfall, expand that so you can see whether or not you're getting, and you'll see the difference between a hit and a miss. The PageSpeed scores are going to be different. Also keep in mind, every asset on your page is cached. So if you don't have images caching, right, or you don't have JavaScript caching, here's another common thing that I see. This is a big thing, and one of the reasons that I'm a proponent of coding a really good site versus using a lot of plugins to do this. Sometimes you'll see auto-optimize is notoriously slow sometimes at regenerating its JavaScript files. And so you'll see like requests for auto-optimize files that take seconds to load. That's because that auto-optimize had to regenerate that file to minify everything on that request, right? So a lot of people think that, WP Rocket does have a feature where you can pre-crawl the site and generate these things, pre-populate, preload the cache is what they call it. But a lot of these plugins purge those things from when various things happen. Like when you create a new site and you publish it, it'll purge your caches. Those assets have to be re-warmed up. Things have to be re-minified, recached. All of that stuff has factors that will make your page speed score fluctuate to make it, less confusing and more reliable, which a lot of times it makes us pull our hair out. Okay, so common things I see that are problems, all right? Slow time to first byte. This, I'm in so many Facebook groups and people are like, I can't get my time to first byte is slow. I can't get it fast. It's 1 second. It's this. I've done all these things. Okay, I'm going to give you some ground rules, and I'm going to give you something I learned a very, very hard way. Okay. First of all, the number one thing you can do to make your time to first byte faster is to enable some sort of caching. Why time to first byte is slow is because it's actually processing your PHP request. That's going to be slower no matter what, if it has to do that request. So you have to use a caching plugin. Server caching, edge caching, a plugin, whatever you want. Something has to be caching. One, make sure that the cache is a hit, okay? I like to look at it like this. Maybe if you're on a really slow hosting provider that's overloaded, you might have a 400 millisecond time to first byte. I really don't think, guys, as much as it behooves me to throw other hosting people like under the bus, 90% of the time, it is not the host's problem that you have a slow time to first byte. It's a configuration problem on your website. So even if you're on a slow host, let's say you have a 400 millisecond time to first byte, which is not horrible, but it's not what Google wants to see. It wants to see something faster. Okay, 200 milliseconds. That's a very small, minuscule amount of time. If you want to have a super fast time to first byte, you need to cache on the edge. If you recall, my site has a time to first byte of 87 milliseconds. If you use full page caching, where you're caching the entire HTML asset in Cloudflare on the edge, which is not the default way. Remember, guys, the default way Cloudflare caches, it doesn't cache your HTML. It only caches the assets the page loads, JavaScript files, CSS files, images. It caches those things. HTML still has to go all the way back to your origin server, get rendered, and present itself to you, the user. If you use full page caching, which there's a number of plugins and ways, and I'll give you one very affordable tip at the end how to do this. If you use full page caching on Cloudflare, you will cache your entire website on the edge, all right? That is going to give you a sub 100 millisecond TTFB, most likely. If your time to first byte's over 700 milliseconds, something is probably wrong. If it's 1 second, 1.2, 1.5, something's definitely wrong. I can almost guarantee you something is not caching, okay? Your page is not caching. And here's my years of experience wisdom I'm going to give you guys, and I'm going to tell it to you. It's not printed on the slide. There are certain plugins that will force WordPress to not cache a page. They are things like advertising plugins, plugins doing weird stuff where it wants to like know everything about a user when it hits your site. I don't have a claim on what these plugins are. I'm telling you the ones I've seen. I've even seen where certain implementations of WordPress and server configurations have broken the cache. And what you will see is they will send something called a no cache header. And if you see that no cache header, something is breaking. It's forcing that page not to cache. I have seen people pull their hair out trying to get their TTFB down low, only to find out they're not looking at their headers, and all of it's right there in plain sight. That page is not caching. Okay, that's my really important tip to you, is know what you're dealing with in terms of whether your page is caching or not.
Tom, we had a real quick question on that slide. Can you explain a little bit more about caching on the edge? What the on the edge means?
So Cloudflare is a distributed content delivery network. So they've got hundreds of servers located all over the world, okay? And what it does by default, the default way Cloudflare, if you have a free account, okay, the way it works is you make a request and it's intercepted by Cloudflare, because Cloudflare has your DNS usually. So Cloudflare's got your DNS, it receives that request, and it's like, okay, I'm making a Robert Jacoby, a good friend of mine and friend of the channel and group. This is his website. I hope he doesn't mind. I didn't tell him I was going to be featuring him on this, but you know, the whole idea here is if Robert goes through Cloudflare on his site, the request hits a Cloudflare node, okay, on the edge, and that node's going to be the closest to him. That's the edge, okay, that we talk about. If he's on a free one, then what's happening is the free Cloudflare with the false configurations, we're going to make Cloudflare is then going to go back to his origin server where his host is, and it's going to request that page. That trip takes time, wherever his hosting provider might be. Maybe he's in Timbuktu, okay? You know, and I'm in Florida, and it's trying to fetch his, you know, site from Taiwan, right? It's far away. So what edge caching does is it takes and it removes the need for that request for it to go to the origin server. It says, we're going to grab all the HTML content and we're going to serve it on Cloudflare's edge. So it doesn't just serve one place. Every node or server in Cloudflare's network could have a copy of that page on it. And so it serves it. If he's in Chicago, there's a node in Chicago. It serves the entire page of content from Chicago directly to him, giving him an extremely fast load time. And if you have a globally distributed site and you don't require a ton of caching, right, or don't require a ton of non-cached pages, you can serve the majority of your content right from the edge to every user with the closest location, and you can take a lot of load off of your origin server, and that's edge caching. Okay, this is an example of a request that I forced a broken cache to occur, and you'll see that this says Cloudflare cache status was a miss. I wanted you guys to see what a hit and a miss would be. You know, essentially side by side. This is a hit, okay? So you'll see these types of things on here, and you'll notice that this is the miss, this is the hit. I wanted you to see an example of what it would look like if you saw either one. And just replace Cloudflare with whatever your server is. You'll see your server's headers here. And they might vary a little bit because these things vary by server, but you'll see something, look for cache, hit or miss, okay? Okay, so again, let's dig in a little deeper to why my test results might fluctuate, okay? This is mostly, if you've got all of these other factors attributed for, okay? So we know our site's caching, all right? We know our site is, it's hitting the cache. We know we've got the right device types, and we're not getting the, well, it's mobile here and desktop here and throttled on this and unthrottled. We've removed all of those things. Why is my site variably going up and down? And why is my load time? What I want you to look at is two things. You need to ascertain, is your onload fluctuating? Your onload is mostly controlled by your server you're hosting on, okay, and your website. Your fully loaded is being determined by all those third-party scripts. I have seen sites loading Facebook where, by the way, the other thing is, if you're in the, outside of the US, you could be loading third-party scripts that are serving from a local location in the United States because the software company that you're using has servers in the US. One example of this might be something like Hotjar, right? Maybe Hotjar loads really fast if you're in the US, but if you're in Australia, Hotjar loads really slow. It's an example. I don't know if it does or not, but I have seen scripts where people in Australia are loading Facebook pixels. I have no idea why, and they're taking seconds to load. So you need to get a handle on what is causing the variance, because sometimes some requests from these third parties are not cached. You might request a script and it might have to go back all the way to the origin server somewhere, and that script is not cached on the edge. And so you've got to look at these third-party scripts and look at your onload time. If your onload time is really, really consistent every time that you do your test, your server and your hosting is likely fine. It's probably something to do with these third-party scripts being requested. Okay, here's another big one that I see. I can't tell you, I get to look at a lot of people's websites because we host a lot of websites and people come to us about, how do I make my site faster? And I can't tell you how many times I see people running for caching and optimization. I mean, they're optimizing the optimizations the other caching plugins did. I mean, get rid of this. Simplify your strategy. If you're running 3 or 4 plugins, if you're running WP Rocket, Auto Optimize, clean up my JavaScript code, W3 Total Cache, turn all of these off, okay? Turn them off and figure out what your baseline is. Simplify your optimization strategy. When you look at your waterfall, if you've got image optimization plugins that are like requesting assets from a CDN, and you've got other optimization plugins, and you've got 50 different sources your stuff is coming from, simplify all that. Try to make it as few sources as possible. Turn off your CDN. Sometimes I see these plugins that are supposed to make people's sites faster, slower. Okay, if you're using a really good hosting provider, I can almost guarantee you the CDNs that are provided by premium hosting providers like Convesio, Pantheon, Kinsta, all of those folks, like if we're using Cloudflare and Fastly and all this, these free image optimization plugins or really cheap ones that are pushing all your content to their CDN, they're not going to be as fast as these CDNs. You know, I mean, we deploy enterprise Cloudflare on all of our accounts with Argo enabled and all of the edge caching and all of that stuff. The first thing we do is disable all these third-party CDNs, and it immediately makes the site go faster. Because instead of waiting for these other lesser CDNs to load, we're loading everything from the origin, which is all distributed through Cloudflare. So just simplify your process, turn all of this stuff off, see where your site sits, and start to surgically fix some of the things. People turn on so many plugins, it just makes things a mess, and it makes your site unreliable. Okay, my additional tips for performance, we're almost at the end here, so happy to do any Q&A we got, but utilize caching. One of the best things that you can do is Cloudflare APO. This is a super awesome tool. It's called Automatic Platform Optimization. I don't get commission for this if you go buy it. I think it's $5 a site, and it's freaking awesome. They have essentially given you the ability to do what used to be only available at the premium, like $200 a month enterprise account, where they're now like APO includes breaking cache on Cloudflare when it detects WordPress cookies and WooCommerce. So it's really intelligent caching on the edge with Cloudflare with a lot of other really cool stuff. You should check this out, Automatic Platform Optimization. Use SSL with your with HTTP2. Again, this is a double one. Take advantage of Cloudflare if you're not using it. Even the free version is really good. There are some plugins that will allow you to do full page caching on the edge. I've had mixed results with them. If you guys have a plugin you love that enables you to do Cloudflare edge caching, drop it in chat. Reduce the number of requests. Remember, if your site's getting like 200 requests, try to pare that down. Faster sites, lesser request sites are always faster, in my experience. Optimize image size. This is another one. I mean, we know this, but like I was just looking at someone's sites the other day, and like they're loading images that are like megabytes in size, and I'm like, why? Like, this is not, like, optimizing images is so easy, you know? And then lastly, defer scripts. I hear a lot of people talking about the plugin flying scripts. WP Rocket will defer JavaScript for you, all of that stuff. Essentially, it's kind of like cheating a little bit. You know, by the way, there's a lot of discussion on forums about a product called Nitro Pack. And Nitro Pack is widely regarded by, like, I would say purist developers as kind of cheating. It basically just defers everything so the page speed algorithms don't see it. So they think your page is fully loaded, but yet a bunch of stuff has been deferred off and is going to load later. And so that's, you know, your decision whether you use tools like that. But I think all of us want to build really great sites out of the box. Okay, so my last thing here, and then I'm going to shut up and answer questions. Big question was, when do you choose to redesign your site or recode your site? First of all, I never pitch this to customers as redesigning their site. I don't want to redesign sites. Redesigning sites opens up all these opinion questions about what colors should they be in photos and all this. What I want to do, and when I pitch this to customers, is we're going to recode your existing site. That's what we're going to do. And we're recode it to better standards because of all these reasons. Biggest reasons: better SEO. You have a really timely reason to approach customers about this now because Google is launching this in May. Everybody wants better SEO. Better load times, faster load times. They increase conversion. If you have a lead gen site or a shopping cart site, this should be a no-brainer to recode these sites, get it up to modern you know, specifications, and it'll make it much faster. I mean, you know, these things can have significant impacts. You know, we've got a customer that we did some work for, and they got a 30% conversion rate lift of leads on their site, and they get thousands of leads a month, just optimizing their site better. And so, I think that recoding your site is really powerful. But when do you make that decision? We're a work in progress. Like, don't anyone go to our site and do our PageSpeed score, because it's not great right now. We, as a startup, used a template from Theme Forest, like, to throw up a site a couple of years ago, and it just never performed really well. The theme wasn't coded really well. It was kind of just a dumpster fire, and we packed in lots of scripts and chat bots and all these things like most businesses do, and it just degraded over time. And we're supposed to be promoting really fast hosting, and our site wasn't living up to the standard we thought it should be. And so we decided we were going to recode it, and we picked Oxygen to recode it in, and we decided we were going to custom do a bunch of the components and all that kind of stuff. And this is our sort of before and in progress. It's still not perfect. We still have a lot of third-party scripts causing a lot of variation in our score. And we're going through this process of auditing this right now, where it's like, do we need all of these things? Like, do we need every pixel and tracking code known to man? And so all of these things are things to take into account when you're choosing this. When you should start over, you got to make a business case for it. I've given you a couple of things, and stay away from redesign. If you make it recoding, it's really easy, because it's a 1-for-1, right? And as long as you've got good developers, you don't have to reinvent the wheel. It's literally just replicate the site with a better theme, a custom theme, page builder, all that kind of stuff. So hopefully that helps you guys. I'm going to turn it back to Emily now, and we'll get into some questions.
Awesome, Tom. Thank you so much. We do have some questions in here, so let me just pull them
I'm
up.
sorry, I thought I was going to talk less and have more time for Q&A, but
don't worry about it. We'll get you on another happiness hour here soon, and let people attack you then with all their website optimization questions. Let's see. So let me start. We had a question earlier on saying where to go to learn how to correct the problems Lighthouse reports, saying they're having issues understanding the problems reported by Lighthouse. Do you have any quick insights there?
Yeah. Well, there's a couple ways you will deal with these problems, and it depends what type of problem it is, right? So, sometimes Lighthouse is telling you your time to first byte is slow, and that might be a hosting problem, but it's more likely a caching problem. And so fixing that might be as easy as just configuring and installing caching software. I will tell you, there is a lot of videos online about how to pick your favorite caching plugin. I tend to favor WP Rocket. Lots of tutorials on how to optimize your site with WP Rocket. There are some really great courses on, oh my gosh, what's the really good course website? I forget the name, Udemy. If you go to Udemy and you type in PageSpeed optimization, there are a ton of great courses for super cheap if you want to go to college on how to optimize your site, because there's just so many different things. You start on YouTube, right? There's a lot of people doing great YouTube videos on how to optimize sites, how to fix things. The challenge is not in plugin manipulation, okay? Where the challenge, and by the way, a lot of times using plugins for this stuff works great. You can address a lot of issues and make meaningful improvements using plugins. The problem that you're going to have is when you start to get into trying to fix issues where you got code problems that just can't be fixed, and those are things where you've got to get I got to swap out a slider widget for something more effective because Rev Slider is just super unoptimized. You're starting to make structural changes to sites and content changes. Those are things that are going to be more involved, and you need to have a developer that you trust to go in and work with you on those things.
Awesome. Thanks, Tom. Beth wants to know if she can just go ahead and hire you to do all this for her. Next question. So is overcaching a thing? So this question was, they use Cloudflare, they use WP Rocket. Is it possible that they're overcaching?
Okay, so my interpretation of what you mean by overcaching is more of an issue with what the industry refers to as cache synchronization. What you don't want to get is one version cached here and another version cached there. And here's a really, really great thing that, well, not a great thing that happens is auto optimize. I don't love that plugin. And the reason I don't love it is because every time it makes a minification file, it creates a custom name for it. It's a lot of numbers, .min.js. Well, when if you have a site that's got edge caching or server caching, right? And auto optimize creates a file and the server, the edge is caching that file and auto optimize recaches that file, it changes the name. So now what happens is you have a messed up, missing CSS homepage that's blown up. And the reason why that happens is because auto optimize didn't tell the other caching system that file is gone, okay? And here's the new one. And so it's looking for a file and it's 404ing. And so all of your styles are blown up on your website and you're now thinking, what happened to my website? And it's a caching issue. And not having properly synchronized caches can cause that problem. This is why WP Rocket built the integration to Cloudflare in their plugin. So when its cache purges, they can purge the edge, okay? And so that's the thing that I think is really sort of important when it comes to overcaching. The other frustration with overcaching or cache synchronization is when your developers are working on stuff and they're fighting caches. So, you know, those are things that are sort of hard to, you know, they're just hard to fight with during the development process. And so if you're not used to really being diligent about purging your caches and all that type of stuff, you could run into some frustration with your developers if that you're not the one developing it.
Great, thank you, Tom. Really great insights there. Next question, why the big difference between mobile and desktop on Google Page Insights?
Because mobile is using a 3G slow, at least 5-year-old phone emulation in its tests. And the reason why it's doing that is it's trying to go to the lowest common denominator of user. And if you remember, that's why the desktop versus the mobile is so drastically different in Google PageSpeed Insights. PageSpeed Insights on mobile on Google, the Google website, is actually using a throttled connection and device, and it's emulating that. Now on GTmetrix, you can go into the advanced settings and you can do all of that, okay? And you should see a score that's relevant to that, but the desktop is unthrottled. And so that's why you're seeing all of your stuff load really fast on a modern browser versus an emulated 5-year-old phone on a 3G connection.
Cool, that makes sense. Let's see, what impact, positive or negative, on the TTFB is it when there's a flexible SSL on Cloudflare that connects to a non-SSL origin server?
Shouldn't be any, because termination of the SSL for the browser is happening on the edge. And that is one of the benefits of Cloudflare, and one of the reasons why Cloudflare is really good to use is because it's going to terminate that SSL to that browser on Cloudflare. Now, you know, you might have seen, this is a very common thing, people deploy Cloudflare on their site and they get this redirect error where it's like too many redirects, can't load the site, okay? And that is very frustrating, but if you just set your SSL settings from flexible to full, that'll fix that. The difference here is flexible is meant to work when you don't have an SSL necessarily on your origin server. You should have an SSL on your origin server and you should set it to full. And what that will do is flexible, I'm going to draw on the air here. Okay, so I'm the user out here. I connect to Cloudflare. This is encrypted via an SSL, this connection here. Cloudflare has to connect to my server now, okay? If I have an SSL on my server, if I put Cloudflare in full mode, it's going to connect over an SSL to my server. If I don't, if it's in flexible mode, it'll make a non-SSL connection to my server, which is less secure. You really want every one of those things to be encrypted at each leg. And especially if you do edge caching on Cloudflare, your termination for your SSL will be on the edge and all your content will serve from Cloudflare on the edge. So you'll have like zero impact, in my opinion, on having an SSL on both ends. That is the preferred way to do it, is in full mode.
Awesome, thank you. So yeah, full is best on Cloudflare.
One caveat, because I saw people asking, full is best. You gotta have an SSL on your server for this to work. It doesn't need to actually be the SSL for your site. That would be what's called full strict mode, where it has to, like any server SSL on that server, like if you hit HTTPS on your site, if you have an SSL, it might still terminate, but it'll tell you this doesn't match the name of your domain, right? You might have a shared SSL. That'll still work in full. If you go full strict, that won't work because you have to have an SSL for your exact site and domain that it's connecting through. But if you have an SSL on your server and your site through your server, full is the better mode to have this in, and you'll totally avoid those redirect errors.
Wonderful, thank you, Tom. We have a couple more questions. I know we're over time right now, so Tom, I want to make sure you're okay to stick around and answer a couple more questions.
Yeah, sure.
Awesome, and I understand also if people watching have to log out and all that, have calls or things they need to get to, but just a reminder that we will be sending out the recording, so you'll get to that as well. And it's always available basically immediately after we finish up here in the Facebook group. So here's a question. I use Divi, and I'm speaking for the person asking. I use Divi and have a huge array of plugins I work with, a majority of which are premium. They're on a Lightspeed server and use Lightspeed cache. With lots of playing around in the settings, they were able to get really good scores in GTmetrix. So the question is, if he's able to get good results in GTmetrix with all these plugins installed and running, is it still recommended to use less plugins, and why?
No, I mean, if it's working for you, that's great. I mean, it's hard. I mean, one, it's hard to know how many plugins is a lot because it's variable by site and people. But I mean, if your scores are great and you're happy with it and you're using all the plugins you want, then that's awesome. I mean, maybe they're all really efficient plugins. I don't have a ton of experience with Divi, but I mean, hey, if it's not broke, don't fix it.
Awesome, love that. What is your opinion on the new SG optimizer? Good or bad?
I don't know a ton about it. I mean, I know historically what it is. I understand it. I also know there was they've made some changes where they're forcing caching on by default now for most of their sites, but I don't really know enough about SG Optimizer to comment on it. But it sounds like I would just try it and run it and see how it affects your scores.
Cool, fair enough. And another question. This person hosts a number of sites on Flywheel, Flywheel has a proprietary caching engine named FlyCache, which works with their CDN. This person noticed that FlyCache applies caching exclusions for common WordPress plugins. They have no experience with Cloudflare, but is it possible to compare what Flywheel's offering with what Cloudflare could achieve?
Well, okay, so there's two things here. It sounds like you're asking about. FlyCache, as I understand it, is a caching plugin for caching your site on their server. And they have a CDN at Flywheel, which I think it's probably hard to imagine they built their own CDN now that they're owned by WP Engine, but they're probably using a CDN provider, right? And they're baking it into their Fastly. Okay. Fastly is awesome, super fast CDN. You know, Fastly and Cloudflare have extremely different approaches to the way that they do business. In fact, we looked at Fastly to partner with, and we chose to go with Cloudflare for a lot of different reasons. But I have a ton of respect for Fastly, and you know, who knows, we might integrate to Fastly in the future to add as an option. They're very, very fast. I like what they're doing a lot. So it sounds like you're asking about a couple different things. FlyCache, you probably need that to manage the server caching in WP or in Flywheel. And so that is probably necessary. And I'm just going to assume that they've made optimizations with these exclusions to address common problems that they've seen. And if you're using their Fastly CDN and you're getting really good scores, then I don't think there's a need for Flywheel. The only thing I don't know enough about to speak to is, does Fastly cache content on the edge? And you know, if that is something that you want to do, you'd have to ask Flywheel if there's a way to do that with their existing CDN, where you can do full page caching, is what it's called, full page caching on the edge.
Awesome. Thanks, Tom. We've got a couple more questions, and then I'll say we'll stop it there. And just a reminder that Tom is in the Facebook group, so if you have questions after this, tag him in the chats there, and he can help answer them, and we can keep the conversation going over there as we're able to. But really quick, what's your take, Tom, on Jetpack CDN for images? The person asking says it's super fast. Do you have an opinion?
I feel like this is a trick question.
Uh-oh.
I'm generally not a huge, big Jetpack fan. Okay, I hope it's okay to say that. It just has a lot of like additional stuff jammed in it. As a general rule, we turn off the Jetpack CDN because we've noticed it's slower than Enterprise Cloudflare. And so that's my take on it. I haven't really done any benchmarking on it, but I know dozens of times I've disabled that because we've gotten better performance with Enterprise Cloudflare than that. But you know, it probably is better than 90% of the hosting providers. Like if it's like my hosting provider and no CDN, or Jetpack's image CDN, I'm sure Jetpack's image CDN is definitely going to be faster. Cool,
fair answer there. And then last question that we'll take today is, and I don't know, this might be opening up a whole box of things, but can you talk more about blocking time?
Blocking time, so frustrating. So blocking time is basically time where a script is being blocked or an asset's being blocked from loading because another asset has to load before that asset is loading. And it's a big pain in the butt, and it's usually happening in the inner workings of JavaScript. And so it's the #1 way to fix that is to defer JavaScript. The other thing that's good for helping this, by the way, is something called Rocket Loader on Cloudflare. Rocket Loader has to be turned on, okay? So if you're using Cloudflare and you're having an issue with total blocking time, turn on Rocket Loader and see how that works. They designed Rocket Loader to optimize JavaScript delivery. And so it's not a cure-all by any means, but a combination. If you don't know how to fix this and you're starting from ground zero, test deferring your JavaScript to checkbox, a couple checkboxes in WP Rocket if you're using that, or W3 Total Cache or whatever. Check that. And then the other thing is, if you're using Cloudflare, go ahead and try enabling Rocket Loader to optimize that as well.
Awesome. Thank you, Tom. And I'm just posting here in the Zoom chat the link to the Facebook group, because this recording will be available immediately over there. And then I will be sending, once I get the recording and get it up on YouTube and get the page up on our site, you'll be able to see it over there as well. But that'll be slightly delayed, probably tomorrow. But you will get that email with links to Tom's slides and all of that. And anyway, we'd love to have you in the Facebook group anyway, if you're not already there. So I posted that link, and it looks like, well, if anyone has any other questions, post them in the Facebook group, and Tom's there, and we'll try to get those answered. And Tom, thank you so much again for your time. Between last Friday and now, you've just given us so much great value, and I really appreciate it, because you're always so willing to share all of your expertise and knowledge in such an open way. So it really is appreciated by the GoWP community. So thank you.
I appreciate it. Well, thank you, everyone. I had a blast, and feel free to follow up in the Facebook group, and I'll jump in and answer as many questions as I can. Thanks.
Awesome.
Everyone.
Thank you, Tom. And thanks everyone for joining. See y'all later. Bye.